Hello, listeners. Welcome to the 13th episode of the Unlocking the Energy Trilemma podcast. Today, Ravi from India, Jam from Spain, and our guest, Sonia Dunlop from the UK. Sonia is the CEO of the Global Solar Council, the world's solar PV industry association, and vice chair of the Global Renewables Alliance. Sonia was a senior policy advisor in several international institutions, and she is an expert in the energy industry. We talk about solar energy, its expected growth, and its challenges. Ravi, Jam, over to you.
Thank you, Abba, and welcome, Sonia, to the Unlocking the Energy Trilemma podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Jose. It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to see you.
And let us start in the same way we do with all our guest speakers, asking you for a fact or figure related with the energy trilemma and the topic today, which is solar power. What do you bring us?
Absolutely. So we have just celebrated a historic milestone in the global solar PV industry. We have just reached 2 terawatts of total installed capacity all over the world. To give you an idea, that's equivalent to the total electricity generation capacity of Europe, the US, and India put together. So if you put together all of those 7 billion roughly solar panels around the world, you've got quite a big power station spread in every village, town, and city across the world. So that is my big fact: 2 terawatts of total installed solar capacity.
That's amazing, Sonia. So what are your global expectations for solar in the near future? Are you seeing continued growth, capacity growth, such as what we've seen over the last few years, or are you starting to see a slowdown in certain markets?
We are expecting huge growth. Indeed, I call it the solar hockey stick, because just as we see this horrendous and terrifying hockey stick of increasing CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, we're also seeing a real hockey stick of exponential growth in global solar, and a lot of that accompanied by battery storage as well. So to give you an idea, we're at 2 terawatts of total installed capacity today. We think that with a good scenario, we could reach 8 terawatts of total installed capacity by 2030. That's just over 5 years from now. And the world has set, the governments of the world have set a total installed capacity target, a tripling of renewables capacity target of just under 12 terawatts by 2030. Of those 12 terawatts, 8 terawatts could be solar, and that just gives you an idea of how fast we are growing and how much potential there is in solar PV plus storage.
And with this rapid expansion of solar energy, grid challenges such as intermittency, infrastructure bottlenecks are becoming more pronounced. What specific policies or regulatory frameworks do you believe are essential to modernize grid infrastructure, incentivize energy storage developments, and ensure reliable integration of solar into the power mix?
Yeah, so fundamentally what we need is more flexibility in our national electricity systems and more flexibility across continents as well. Flexibility comes in many different forms. Of course, it can include building more grid infrastructure, and indeed at COP29 Baku in Azerbaijan, we got a target of 25,000 kilometers of new grid infrastructure by the end of the decade. That means more storage, both battery storage and long duration storage. And indeed, we now have a target of 1.5 terawatts of storage, again, by the end of the decade. But it also means bringing in dynamic pricing, time of use pricing, more demand response, and more cross-border electricity interconnectors, because all of those things provide more flexibility in the system. And that is what we need in order to integrate more solar and more renewables into our electricity grids.
One of the challenges that renewables has been facing is inverter-based renewables such as wind and solar can often impact the grid inertia, leading to increased curtailment. How do you foresee that issue actually being addressed over the years?
So curtailment is essentially a twin issue around grid capacity, and there, of course, reinforcing the grid is part of the solution, but also it's an issue around negative and zero prices at times of high solar generation, and that's where we really need both flexible demand and storage to shift some of that solar into the later evening and into the night, and shift some of that demand into the middle of the day. We are planning to publish a big report next year on best practices on how to address these grid challenges, the curtailment challenge, where solar plants are sometimes being asked to curtail their production, to curtail the amount of electricity they're injecting into the grid, the cannibalization problem, where our revenues sometimes can be lowered because of those low prices in the middle of the day, but also to highlight how we have a huge amount to offer the grid in terms of grid forming services and grid and ancillary services to the grid. Voltage services, frequency services, black start services. Inverters can be used in very new and innovative ways, and that's part of our message to the world, that we are both a solution to the grid's problems, as well as obviously a challenge and something that needs to be resolved if we're going to get to that completely decarbonized power system that we need.
You have mentioned inverters, you have mentioned batteries. I think these two elements are key to the success of solar, and solar manufacturers should be deploying a full package with the three things: the solar PV panels, the battery storage, and a good grid forming inverter. Is this something that you foresee in the market, this kind of vertical integration, or there will be three pieces and the end user must combine them as they can or want?
So we're definitely seeing that with PV and storage. So most of the big solar manufacturers, including our big members, Jinko, Tongwei, Longji, Trina Solar, a lot of them are now also manufacturing storage as well. GCL is another example. So the big solar manufacturers are now really becoming solar plus storage manufacturers, to add to the other leading storage manufacturers such as CATL and Tesla, of course, and others as well. In terms of inverters, no, that is a distinct product that typically is made by manufacturers of other electronic products as well. Huawei is the leading manufacturer of this worldwide, with 30% of the global market. Other big ones include SMA, our member based in Germany, as well as other big ones including SolarEdge, Sungrow, Goodwe, Fronius, and many others as well. So it's a much more fragmented market with a number of different suppliers from all over the world, more distributed around the world, and tends to be different types of companies coming to the table.
You brought about negative pricing and reduction of profitability, and do you see this as a constraint for investment in solar in the coming years?
No, because there's no better cure to high prices than high prices, and there's no better cure to negative prices than negative prices. We just need to be more innovative in how we do things. We need to definitely be adding storage in order to be able to capture some of those higher prices in the wholesale market. Be thinking about signing corporate power purchase agreements in order to be supplying that power at a guaranteed price over a long period of time. And also thinking about really doing things differently. And this is a very simple one. In Japan, where they do have issues in this space, they are now starting to install bifacial solar panels, so solar panels that can generate power on both sides, and installing them vertically in an east-west orientation, so that you get a morning peak and an evening peak and nothing at 12 o'clock when the sun is at its highest. And so innovative installations like that, which become more and more possible as the prices come down, can also be a solution to some of these problems.
70% of the new installations of rooftop solar in California include a battery and are more oriented to self-consumption rather than selling the electricity to others. Is the behind-the-meter model the future for solar?
Oh, yes. The behind-the-meter market segment, both for residential rooftop and industrial rooftop, is absolutely huge. And yes, we have to be driving to self-consumption. We have to be really maximizing those self-consumption rates and ensuring that the scheme for encouraging rooftop solar and for rewarding the excess solar that's injected into the grid encourages that self-consumption as well. Absolutely. That is a very viable business model, and our responsibility as well to make sure that we're not putting undue pressure on the grid. So yes, self-consumption is king. Anything that can increase that self-consumption rate, which is the percentage of solar electricity generated on the roof of a building that is used in that building, is critical. And that of course involves storage, but it also involves electrification of everything in the building, car transport, heating, cooling, and so on. And also, of course, smart building energy management.
The US and Europe have distinct approaches to solar market development, yet both have very aggressive renewable adoption plans by 2030. In that context, what opportunities do you see exist for collaboration between these regions in the area of technology development, policy frameworks, supply chain issues, and so on?
There is already a lot of collaboration happening at government level and at industry trade association level between the solar and storage industries of those two different blocks. There is a lot that they want to do together. Now, of course, the US has the Inflation Reduction Act, which has spurred a huge amount of manufacturing and deployment of utility scale solar and a good rooftop market in a number of states. The EU doesn't have exactly the same thing, but has the Net Zero Industry Act and has different frameworks across the different member states. In terms of the issue of supply chains and manufacturing, the key thing I think we need a global, high-level, long-term strategy for the manufacturing of PV at global level. We need to look at what makes sense. We need to look at what the world needs in terms of a low-cost and resilient supply chain, and look at how we can deliver that together over the next 10 years. And that's what we are working at the Global Solar Council. And we are definitely looking at the various trade barriers in place and trying to assess whether they are supporting deployment or not. Because for us, the absolute priority is installing those 25 billion solar panels by the end of the decade, those 8 terawatts of total installed capacity. And that helps that is to our benefit.
And in the same vein, what do you see the role of China, especially China has got such a dominant position in the manufacturing of solar panels, the manufacturing of batteries. There's also some argument that a lot of those solar panels and batteries are being manufactured by thermal carbon-emitting fuels. They're adding new coal-fired capacity. Some of those same products are being exported into the United States and Europe. So how do you see all that playing in, and how can one still make the argument that this is truly going to achieve a net zero objective, and some of the inputs coming in are using some serious fossil fuels?
China has done a huge amount for solar, for storage, for the global energy transition and the global climate. The efforts to combat climate change. The cost of solar has come down 90% because Germany and a few other European countries moved first and invested in this in the late 1990s, early 2000s. China spotted an opportunity and started manufacturing it at huge scale, which brought the cost down 90%. And in many ways, the world has so much to thank China for on that. It has offered the world the gift of very cheap solar, and that is what made the Paris Agreement possible, and that is what making the energy transition possible. However, we do recognize that, of course, we need a more resilient global supply chain, and of course, that does mean to some extent a more diversified global supply chain. And the Chinese government and the Chinese industry do recognize this, and they are willing to support more PV manufacturing in other countries. India has huge factories being set up. Mostly, you are right, at the moment to export to the US market, because that is where we're seeing very high prices, but potentially in the future also to be consumed domestically in the Indian market. And many other countries as well are seeing a big boost in manufacturing, including the United States itself. Ravi also asked me about the question of the CO2 intensity of manufacturing PV, and just to address that. So yes, manufacturing solar is a relatively energy intensive thing to do, an electricity intensive thing to do, not so much in the actual manufacturing of the solar panels, but in the refining of the polysilicon and the melting down of the sand to make that raw silicon that's then turned into ingots, wafers and cells. But the manufacturers are first of all working very hard to bring down that electricity intensiveness of the processes. We are working to come up with a global standard methodology for footprinting the CO2 of a solar panel. And we are doing everything we can in order to address the issues of captive coal being used in the supply chain. And the more, and obviously 80 to 90% of this is made in China. And of course, the Chinese grid is decarbonizing very fast. 300 gigawatts a year. And so the Chinese grid is about to reach peak CO2 emissions intensity, and the emissions intensity of the Chinese grid is about to come down. So this is a problem that essentially will solve itself very quickly.
Yeah, just on the same, before I hand it over to Jose for his closing questions, energy storage is a critical part of the renewable story, and we have seen the growth of short-term energy storage, battery energy solutions. What are your views on long-duration energy storage, and how would that evolve? What are the trends in bringing the cost down, the round-trip efficiency higher, and making it more viable so that you have a total decarbonized solution for the industry?
Long duration energy storage is super important, and we have a very close collaboration with the Global Long Duration Energy Storage Council, which is working on exactly this. Remember, it can be chemical energy, but it can be also kinetic energy, mechanical energy, and other types of long duration storage. And we need to be developing all of these in order to get to those high percentages of renewables penetration. Within those, of course, green hydrogen is potentially a way of storing energy in the long term, as is, of course, hydro and pumped storage hydro in particular. And we really need to be looking at building more and more of all of these technologies in order to be able to deliver the energy transition. But yes, storage is absolutely critical. The solar industry will not succeed unless it comes with short-term and long-term energy storage. And that is despite the fact of our costs that are falling very fast, right? So even though solar is incredibly cheap, producing the most affordable electricity, the cheapest electricity ever known in the history of humankind, and the fastest growing source of electricity in the history of humankind. We can't do it all, and so we need other renewables technologies like wind, like geothermal, and we need those supporting, enabling technologies like storage, long duration, short duration, pump storage hydro, like green hydrogen, and like the grid in order to make this package a reality.
Solar industry is doing great things, but at the end, prices for the end users are not decreasing as probably expected. So where is the gap? What do we need to close this gap between having tons of renewables, terawatt hour of renewables, and a really better and sustainable and affordable price for end user industries and so on?
So obviously, the electricity prices are determined by something called the merit order effect, which basically means that the most expensive power station on the grid sets the price, and they set the price, and that is what everyone gets. Yeah. It's not a perfect system, but it's probably better than all the others that have been tried in the past. We are pushing a new vision for electricity markets, which we are calling the electric protocol, based on the internet protocol that created the World Wide Web, where every single generator, no matter how big or small, no matter what technology, gets the same access to the grid, the same prices, and the same revenue potential from grid services as well. And we think that might be a first step towards solving this problem. But yes, I can see why you might say that electricity prices aren't coming down, especially at periods of peak demand. That's partly because there isn't enough flexibility in the system. We see that in many markets around the world, and partly because of this merit order effect affect a system for determining the price of electricity in the wholesale market, which awards the price to the highest bidding generator.
Sonia, thank you very much. Just for closing, we are going to ask you the same question that we do to all our speakers. If you had a magic wand and you could unlock the energy trilemma, what would you do with that magic wand?
For me, the Holy Grail is really addressing those trade barriers, both tariff and non-tariff barriers, and those geopolitical barriers in solar. We are the most politicized and the most geopoliticized of all the renewables, and indeed, I think, of all the energy technologies. And that is why we are working towards that global, long-term, high-level supply chain strategy for solar that I hope can be the deal, the art of the deal, that can replace some of these barriers that we see at present that are due to some of those frictions in the system. So for me, that is the Holy Grail, because if we can crack that nut, we can fly. We can really fly. If we address some of these core challenges in solar, we can really start to dream of 2 degrees of global warming and no more. So that's the dream.
Sonia, thank you very much, and we'll follow you in social media and all the events that we attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We hope you liked this conversation. Follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe for free to the podcast on the platform of your choice, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, or Apple. Because in the next episode, Ravi and Jam will speak with another expert in the industry to unlock the energy trilemma.